All right. 4:31, call the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Dorothy, would you take roll, please?
Yes, sir. Garrett Harmon,
Here.
Rustin Zuber,
Here.
David Lipscomb,
Here.
David Jones,
Here.
Cliff Tuttle,
Here.
Hunter Patterson,
Here.
Tricia Byram.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. First of all, want to congratulate Commissioner Jones on 54 years of marital bliss.
I didn't say that. About 30 years of merit, never mind.
Okay. Congratulations nonetheless.
Thank you, sir.
First item on the agenda is minutes from our August 6th meeting. Any questions or comments?
There's one correction.
All right.
I think
Tricia.
Tricia was here last time.
Yes, I was here.
Listed
Yeah. All right. Need to add Tricia Byram to members present. Any other corrections? If not, do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Have a motion
I'll second.
and a second to approve. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. Okay. Item 1 on the agenda, public hearing regarding our zoning code. But I assume we'll have a lengthy discussion about the zoning code before we go into the public hearing.
That's correct.
Sounds good.
Okay. If you recall, when we went through the adoption of the zoning code last year, as that process carried through council, council asked staff and, of course, the planning commission, our development community, to kind of take some notes and pay attention to what hurdles we ran into or any corrections, edits that might be necessary for that first 6 months. So we were preparing that when our lovely pandemic started. Continued working through that behind the scenes, just kind of taking notes on any issues that we found or questions and concerns that have come up as we've started to apply the code. So we do have a handful of adjustments to bring for you today. This is an action item after the public hearing. So I'll run through outline here. Some of it's just small typographical corrections, a couple of small zoning map corrections, review a few definitions, some development regulations, administrative processes, building materials related to a previous House bill that came through the last legislative session, some amendments to the airport zoning district, parking requirements, and City of Kerrville development standards. Then the other 2 public hearings that we have today related to the sign code and the residential transition district, and some thoroughfare plan updates. If you have any questions as we go through these topics, feel free to stop me as we're on that topic, or we can come back after the public hearing either way. A couple typographical errors. As you can see in the C2 zoning code, it says the C2 district accommodates a array of retail, office, and service uses more than C2, and that should actually say C1. Remember, as those districts stack up, we're actually adding more uses to the C2 district. Under C1, we got our counting off. We went from 2 to 4. Section 4 should actually read Section 3. That's those 2 highlights you see on the right-hand side there. Highlight is how it is. That's correct. Yeah, the highlight is how it is today. That first one should read C1, since it's a lower zoning district. That second one just needs to be renumbered to number 3. The R1 purpose section, again with our counting and outline nomenclature, we went from A to 2 on those subsets instead of A, B, C. Same thing in C3, A, B, 3. Those should be changed for consistency. It's amazing when you read through 180-something pages a few times, you miss a few things.
Yes, unless you're using the Aggie method.
No, that's military method. Divide up in 4 groups, 1, 2, C, and D, or A, B, 3, and 4.
Couple zoning map corrections. This property here, don't have the old zoning map in there for you, but it was zoned RC. RC, if you recall, was converted to R2. And these two properties at 322 and 324 May, in the digital zoning file got converted to PI, the Public and Institution District. Those single-family lots, there's a house being built on one of them currently that started, with this process started anyway. So that's just a correction on the map there. I suspect once you zoom out to the scale of the entire city as we reviewed the zoning map, probably got lost in the city limit line weight, because that is the city limit right behind it.
Recognize.
And as we were going through the public and institutional districts, one of the key factors we wanted to update was to label all the parks as public and institutional so that they would be recognizable even from a zoning standpoint. And some of the smaller parks on this list, you can see that were incorporated into the neighborhood, we did not establish as PI. So recommending updating those 6 parks there. Getting into definitions, one of the things that we found to be a little confusing for our customers, staff, and otherwise, the difference between a bed and breakfast, a hotel, and a short-term rental unit. So as we've discussed through a lot of this, what we wanted to try to do was at least clarify a little more the difference between the three. So bed and breakfast is intended to be in a commercial setting, but obviously a smaller scale, more like a boutique hotel. The definition itself says up to 20 rooms, may or may not provide meals. So we wanted to add the language to the end of that definition that this is in a non-residential zoning district. Hotel definition, hotel or motel, we're not recommending any changes, but it's there for comparison. Obviously a commercial entity, more than 20 rooms. And the short-term rental unit is what we all refer to as the Airbnb or vacation rental by owner, those different online formats. So 2 clarifications. At the end, you'll see we're adding in a residential zoning district. So this is for someone changing the one room of their house or converting their house to a short-term rental within a neighborhood. And wanted to also clarify, you see the 4th line of the definition there, just to make it a little more clear that it may or may not be owner occupied. As you go through the definition, it wasn't clear that it was, if owner occupancy was a requirement or an option. And trying to make it a little easier to read that it is an option, but it's not a requirement. And then for the bed and breakfast, it was actually left out of the land use table. So we had a definition that we weren't using. So we've opened that up. The bed and breakfast in a commercial setting in C1, C2, or C3, downtown arts and culture, and mixed use district. And then you can see the short-term rental in the last line are only allowed in this residential districts, either by conditional use or by right, and the C or R3 and RT.
Now, on the short-term rental units, you know, they have to follow all the guidelines as a short-term rental unit, but they could advertise as a bed and breakfast.
Right. Yeah, so whatever they name they choose or how they want to advertise, label themselves, they can use that bed and breakfast term. Just from a zoning standpoint, we wanted to separate the two so that your more traditional bed and breakfast, small boutique hotel is allowed in the commercial districts, and the short-term rental indicates the residential unit.
Did the bed and breakfast, it said food
Say
is
that again?
optional at the bed and breakfast, backing up to the bed and breakfast? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, that they can serve food to their guests, but it's not intended to be a restaurant where it's open to the public. So,
They cannot serve food to
non-guests. That's right. And then we do have a discussion item on the short-term rentals, as you guys talked about last time, after the public hearings, because there'll be no action on that. But
Okay, so if you go past 6 units, 6 beds,
right.
you become a
If you're
bed
in
and breakfast inn.
Yeah, if you're in a residential unit, more than 6 bedrooms, or residential zoning district, 6 bedrooms is not, more than 6 bedrooms is not allowed.
Okay, so it would only, in a residential, it'd only be bed and breakfast,
No, in a residential, it
Or
only-
short-term
short-term rental, right.
would be the more, yeah.
By our terminology, the bed and breakfast is a commercial venture up to 20 rooms in a commercial zoning district.
Any particular business advantage to calling yourself a bed and breakfast inn or a hotel?
That I'm not sure. Like I said, I know the short-term rental online booking has kind of muddied the waters for a lot of those and how they
Yeah,
operate.
yeah,
So
it's-
how they advertise is still separate from how we classify them under zoning. But rather than restrict how they can advertise, basically as we get a call from a customer, we walk through all of these definitions, where they're located and how it actually applies. So,
Yeah, okay. Well, if you're in commercial, it's whatever you want to be, sort of thing.
right,
Okay,
correct.
all right. But you're not going to have a hotel in a residential area.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, hotel, motel are still only C3, downtown arts and culture, mixed use, and the airport district. Church accessory uses. So in the middle of the page, you'll see the definition of a church. The last line, provided that, referring to the accessory uses, classrooms, fellowship halls, social centers, any of those outside of the actual main sanctuary, are allowed as long as they are on the same lot as the sanctuary. As many of you have seen in Kerrville and many other cities, that's not always how churches grow. Wherever they're located, they may start picking up adjacent properties. So one of the questions that came up was, how would a church acquire nearby properties that are either adjacent or contiguous or on the same block, to allow a little more flexibility for them to grow, but not as open-ended to end up impacting further neighborhoods that aren't immediately adjacent. So what we're recommending is to amend the definition to allow accessory uses on either contiguous lots or adjacent lots within the same block. And
But not across the street.
it could be across the
Could be
street.
across the street?
That's why I've had these two definitions out of the code as well, for
Okay.
block and block face. We're
Gotcha.
specifically using block so that it includes the road between two intersecting streets, either side of the street, whereas block face specifically says that one side of the block between intersecting streets. So yes, they could pick up a lot across the street within the same block, so they're still nearby, but not two streets over where they're actually creating some traffic impact in different aspects of the neighborhood that wouldn't be as expected.
What is the zoning, I should know, but what is the zoning for a church?
Church is allowed in any zoning district.
What's the zoning for daycare centers?
Off the top of my head, I do not know.
It's personal impact that, where I lived in a big city to the north that starts with D. A lady had a large house, I had an acre and she had an acre and a half, 2 acres, and she had a big long house. Whenever she started a daycare center.
Okay.
And the neighborhood got up in arms and whatever else, blah, 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 blah. So she knelt down in front and declared it a church with
With the daycare.
one of the things being a daycare center.
Gotcha.
And it took the neighborhood more money than we wanted to spend to stop it, you know, but the traffic alone,
Right.
you know. So that's just one of those little slots that could come up or whatever else. And so Kerrville doesn't have a quote unquote church ordinance.
That's correct. The church is allowed in any district. Again, the original definition was based on the sanctuary in that lot. And the growth of adjacent lots is where we're amending it. I'll have to get back to you on where the daycares can go.
Okay, yeah, let's move along, but that's an issue that might.
Okay. The definition of height in the zoning code versus the building code. So the building code defines the height of a building as the vertical distance from the grade plane to the average height of the highest roof structure. The zoning code goes from average grade to peak of the structure. The two just don't line up. What we're recommending, you can see the underlined section in the definition from the zoning code. Change it to read the vertical distance measured from grade to the average height of the highest roof surface. So our two codes line up. And here's the graphic from the zoning code. As you can see on the right-hand side, building height is defined as from the ground to the peak of the building. On this side here, you can see the building code references the average height of the roof structure. So that average between the peaks and the eaves. So we're just recommending that those two be matched. I'd rather change the local zoning code than try to amend the international building code or something like this one.
Good plan.
Minor difference, and as you can imagine, a lot of your commercial, relatively flat roof structures, this is nominal. But as you get into a pitched roof, it could make quite a bit of difference on the scale and style of the building. Getting into our development regulations, one of the smaller pieces we've picked up, the code currently requires any accessory structure in the front yard is limited to a maximum of 30 inches in height. And trying to figure out how that applies to a carport, which is an accessory structure in front of the house, becomes a very small vehicle. So, what we're recommending is to include an exemption to the height for carports. Arguably, these should be carports that meet the building setback. If it were attached to the house, it would not be an accessory structure. But if it were a freestanding carport, allowing them to obviously be a reasonable height that makes sense.
That's 30 feet now, right?
No, 30 inches. So
Would that be like a little house built over a wellhead or something?
right,
like that?
so fences, garden sheds, a well house, any accessory structure, basically limited in the front yard to being something short so that you don't have 6-foot front yard fences, a garden shed in the front yard, that sort of thing. Keep that stuff in the backyard where the height is not an issue. So,
This is not allowing necessarily, I mean, I read, forgive me, I read it as 30 feet, and I'm thinking of an RV carport.
it's possible if it meets the setbacks. Because it
That
would,
is setbacks height, has a height to distance ratio, right?
no, setback is just from the front property line
I
to the
understand,
structure.
but
There is no relation to height on that. Or we could adjust the carport exemption to a maximum height of 8, 9, 10 feet instead. If that's the direction you want to go.
let it go. I'm concerned.
There's several, the list on the left-hand side, you see there are several references throughout the code that call out single-family land use in the mixed-use zoning district. As we went through a couple iterations of the rewrite, single-family development is not allowed in the mixed-use zoning district. So in each of these districts you see, there's a reference to a single-family development in the mixed-use district that triggers additional requirements, such as increased setbacks, limited height requirements, screening requirements. If there is a single-family structure in the mixed-use district, it's actually grandfathered now. And so we'd be requiring a new development, additional requirements to a grandfathered use that arguably should not be in that location. So we're recommending in each of these to remove that mixed-use reference, since it doesn't apply the way the final draft came through. In the RT zoning district, RT includes single family with an accessory dwelling unit, or a duplex as permitted housing types. However, the regulations section for how those are built only includes single family and the non-residential uses. We're recommending we pull from the R1A and R2 requirements the section of code that talks about the duplexes and the accessory dwelling units and add those to the RT and R2 section. So we have the requirements listed in R1A and R2 for these different types. They just did not get copied into the RT and R2 section for a couple of them. So just trying to clean those up so we're not assuming we go back, switch zoning districts for one regulation and go back to the other, just to make it crystal clear. Some of our administrative processes, pick on the attorneys on this one, because Mike caught this for us. We have a mandatory meeting where you should meet with the director. So obviously we're trying to make our processes as smooth as possible. We're actually recommending that mandatory be removed, and that if a development wants to meet with the planning department, they certainly can as part of their process, but it's not a requirement that we have to track and check off a box that they met with us. So should will remain, mandatory will be struck from the title there.
So should doesn't mean you have to do it?
That's correct. Shall means you have to.
Shall.
Shall. Shall is the nice version of must.
Oh, you minored in English, did you? Okay.
I've had good attorneys smack me around a few times. He's still not smiling back there.
But
It just points out, that's right.
he's smiling inside.
You kept me in line. One of the other things that we've run into, as the commission is well aware, any appeal of a planning and zoning decision, the applicant has 10 days after that meeting to file with our office. Since our meetings are on Thursdays, that 10th day is on Sunday. So that cuts their timeline to get something into our office by 2 more days. So rather than shorten it, we're just recommending we go to 14 days and give them a full 2 weeks to get that back into our office, that request. And then want to add some language that the appeal be placed on a council agenda within 30 days if possible, and the applicant may request no more than a 60-day extension from the planning and zoning denial date. So that we do have some kind of end date for when that appeal occurs as it goes down from the planning commission onto city council. Another one that we've had come up is the mixed use district as a zoning change request requires a concept plan. Mixed use district does have set development requirements as far as setbacks, open space requirements, parking requirements, etc. But the concept plan being a mandatory requirement for that mixed use district, we've actually had a couple of requests come in and change gears because they weren't prepared or weren't ready to do a concept plan yet. They just wanted to get the zoning in place. So I've got 3 different options or recommendations to choose from. So I need a little feedback on this one more than just kind of moving through. One option would be if there was a willingness to delay the concept plan to a secondary approval. That way a project could get their zoning in place, then go back and find market their property and find a project that's willing to go here, then come back with the concept plan at a later date for approval. One option would be to bring it back to the Planning and Zoning Commission with notice to the adjacent property owners within 200 feet, similar to the zone change. To bring it back to the Planning Commission without any notice, because they've already gone through that public hearing process once. And this would just be the Planning Commission approving the concept plan, or remove the concept plan requirement altogether. And obviously the fourth option would be to leave it as is, where the concept plan is required upon application of the zone change request.
I could see where a developer would not want his concept shared just on the open market to anybody that's out there. But I do think that if we've experienced as a commission, having a concept plan when you come for zoning, I think is important. We've denied a few zoning requests because they didn't have a concept plan. So I think concept plan is a good idea, especially for planning and zoning to be able to review. I don't think it's really necessary to let the, the general public have access to it, at least not right away. I think the public hearing aspect of it is important. And I think that having the concept plan is important. And so I guess I'm leaning towards is that option 2. They're required to review and approve from planning and zoning without a public hearing.
And I'll point out, a zone change request for any other district except mixed use and planned development district does not require a concept plan at all. Mixed use and planned development district both require it the way it's drafted now. Planned development district, I would certainly argue we need a concept plan because they're going through every specific detail of a master plan project that does not fit the zoning code. Whereas the mixed use, we have a set of rules that they have to abide by anyway. And it's just how are they gonna apply the mixed use to the concept plan, or to the project is kind of what the concept plan's illustrating.
I like the second option as well.
I mean, I think if we have the public hearing, so the public hearing would occur prior?
With the zone change.
Okay.
So, for example, if we had a case today for mixed use, would go through the public hearing process like any other zone case. The applicant would get their approval through planning commission and city council. And then 6, 12, 18 months down the road, whenever they're ready to start development, they would have to bring the concept plan back to the planning commission for approval before they could start their building process.
It turns it into a 2-step process.
Right.
That just,
And I could see some hesitation in delaying it is that if you get the zoning, but you can't ever get the concept plan approved, where does that leave the project and the property owner? But at the same time, as Mr. Harmon mentioned, showing your concept plan, showing all your cards when you're not ready to fully commit to the project, and you're just going through your zoning entitlement, oftentimes makes property owners nervous.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, and, I think it varies really on a case-by-case basis, but, I mean, like I said, we've turned down some zoning changes because we didn't have a concept plan.
I don't know.
But they weren't mixed use, were they? I mean,
no, they were not.
yeah, we haven't turned any down that were mixed use.
Not because of the plan. I mean, we've
Right.
had some that the plan helped state their case,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think we've denied any because of the plan. Sometimes the plan, we didn't like the plan, but that wasn't necessarily the reason.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've seen any mixed use though that we.
Yeah, I'm
turned
trying to think
we have not had
Mhm.
any requests come to the commission for mixed use.
Yeah.
I have talked to a couple of projects that were going to request mixed use until they came across the requirement for the concept plan.
And
And then they came back with a different request to avoid the concept plan at this time.
I guess, I'm fine with the 2-step process as long as the applicant is full aware that they could still be denied on their plan, and just because they cleared the first hurdle doesn't mean that the second hurdle is going to be really any easier. So,
Would there be any reason not to do a PD? What would be the difference there
So
between?
PD is limited to 5 acres minimum. I see PD as oversimplifying it, but kind of a customized zoning. You have a master plan project and you have specific setbacks and specific parking and specific uses that you're targeting for your whole project. Whereas the mixed use is similar to the downtown arts and culture district. You have much less required setback, so you have more flexibility on where you can build. It is a combination of the multifamily and the different commercial districts.
So right now, if something is zoned mixed use right now, then they don't have to go through this.
That's correct. And we
So-
do have
why are we making, that's the part I don't
Yeah.
understand.
That's correct. We do
That's
have
all
some
right.
areas through the overall rezoning of the city with the new adoption of this code that are zone mixed use. Because they're already zone mixed use, they don't have a concept plan
Right,
requirement.
that's why, to me, it seems like, why impose that requirement at all?
And I think the difference between the PD and the mixed use is PD, there are no specific development regulations. That's part of the plan development. Whereas mixed use, you already have a prescribed development regulation to work with. Now it's just getting your plan to fit within that.
We can still decide, we can say, well, that's not we shouldn't rezone that mixed use,
Mhm.
whether they have a concept plan or not.
Right, yeah, if we make it a two-part piece, you'd still have, is the mixed use the appropriate zoning in this location, yes or no? And then does the concept plan match this location?
I
Yes
got
or
a
no?
question for Mike. If we go with the option 2 where they've already got their zoning approved, had the public hearing, then bring before us a concept plan that we don't agree with, how many times, or I mean, are we opening up the city on some liability that, hey, they're not approving my plan, and we get at an impasse? Could it go that far?
I don't think you're opening up yourself to any more liability. I think that the main issue that I see in codes is clear direction, clear expectations.
Mhm.
Set it out. So I think, just in listening to some of your comments and Drew's comments, I think if people are aware that they're gonna have to, now or whatever, go into an MU and then they're gonna have to come back with show their cards with a concept plan, that goes into their mindset about how long this is gonna take and are they ready for that process. So that's the balance. I don't think, getting back to your question, I don't think it opens up anything, as long as, again, clear expectations and, you all continue to do the right thing, and there's not really, you all are basing it on the facts at play and
Mhm.
uses and what you all see are compatible or not.
Okay.
But you could end up with two different kinds of people. One owns a lot that's zoned MU right now. Somebody comes in and asks for a change and gets that change granted, but then that other person has to do the concept plan. So to me, it feels a little different for each party.
Right. It is, you're correct.
That does, I agree. I see where you're coming from, Rustin. I mean, that doesn't make sense that you would require of a newly changed zone. but you
Somebody
don't require an
decided that the
existing.
MU we have now was good, it should be zoned MU. And that's our job to
Right.
determine if
I
the
see, I
property should be zoned, changed to an MU. And they didn't have the concept plan for that other property,
Right,
so.
that's valid.
And I think some of that came from the different place types in the comprehensive plan. One of the place types being an entertainment mixed-use place type for different areas and different catalyst areas in town. So we went and kind of proactively applied some of that to help spark some of that development. But it's absolutely not the same situation. If it's a new request, they have this extra requirement. If they got MU zoning through the rezoning process of the whole city, they do not have a concept plan requirement. They just have a set of rules to follow.
Well, to me, it seems like if you're going before the commission to change your zoning, you would have the expectation that there's going to be a little more work required to justify or prove that change is necessary.
Right.
Which to me, a concept plan would be part of that. Just because, like I said, we've seen cases already where the zoning wasn't necessarily the issue. The fact that we didn't know what they were going to put in was a bigger issue.
Yeah, that's kind of the difference between the speculative zoning, got a piece of property, and I think a different zoning district enables me to better market and develop it versus I have a project ready to go. The zoning doesn't fit can we make that work?
Mhm.
So,
I guess personally, I still like the idea of having planning and zoning getting a chance to approve or review a concept plan, but not necessarily have to have that publicized to the general public.
right.
Commissioners, any other thoughts on why we should have something different than that?
Well, we don't apply that to the other, when another zone change is what, if somebody wants to make a zone change from R1 to light commercial, we don't make them provide that. They have to prove their case to us.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't prove the case, then we don't approve it. But we don't require that second step in there.
I guess in my mind, a mixed use is more of a general term that, you know, commercial, C1, C2, there's a certain expectation of what that's going to be. R1, R zoning, there's a certain expectation of what that's going to be. Mixed use, to me, there's a lot of gray area in what that could end up being.
It's true. A balance of the commercial versus the multifamily, which level of commercial, horizontal or vertical. There's definitely a lot of flexibility in that district.
So say we were to approve the zoning, they gotta come back, give us the concept plan. We approve that. That's all they can, that property can, nothing else can happen on that property except that plan, right?
Yeah, it would still be tied to that plan. And the description, and I don't have it up there, I apologize. The description of the concept plan, I can say that, is so that it illustrates the concept. It's not exact building size, it's not exact layout, floor plan, certainly nothing to that extent. But I do have a retail component, an office component, and apartment component, roughly this size, these locations, and then kind of work it from there.
If that project falls through, then they would have to come back.
And there is some, in the code, there is some language on what can be approved administratively for some of those changes. If they have a reduction in size on one of the buildings, that can be approved in our office. If they're increasing the size or changing that land use mix, it has to come back to the commission for approval anyway.
Would it revert back? It's not like a PD, like a certain period of
No.
time? Okay.
That would not revert back. Or at least not the way the code is drafted now.
I think I like having the concept plan. I mean, I understand where Rustin's coming from, but also when you're changing zoning, we kind of, we need to put forth some effort to make sure that doesn't just fall by the wayside and become whatever anybody wants to put up without a little bit of a blessing on it. Whereas the current mixed-use areas are probably already have structures on them, I would assume, our current mixed use.
For the most part.
Yeah, it's not like it's just a piece of vacant land out there. It's a mixed use right now that doesn't have to come back with a concept plan.
I definitely think of a few lots, but not large tracts for sure. The only one that I can think of that is a large tract also has a very large building on it. That's the middle school.
Oh,
But
I'll let them slide.
So like, that's a good example of one that it's mixed use now, you're saying?
it is mixed use.
So when that gets demolished and sold, that person can do whatever they want on that piece of property.
Within those
Right,
development regs,
right.
yeah,
But they don't have to bring a concept plan to us.
that's correct.
I don't know if this is required for a vote or not, but you need some direction
Need some direction.
on what to do.
I guess what I anticipated was going through all of this in one clean vote, but definitely need some consensus on this one. Or we can pull it out separate, by all means.
You mentioned that there are some developers that are not moving forward because of the way it is right now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's some evidence that we have.
Yeah,
That keeps going on. I mean, obviously, to me, it's not working quite like it's supposed to.
Commission did have a case come before you from C2 to C3 that was denied.
Mm-hmm.
The initial thought was mixed use, but they do not have enough detail or project plans to put together a concept plan. I'm not even sure it was not ready to show their cards. They don't have a project in mind yet.
Yeah.
They were just looking for the entitlements through zoning. to
Well,
go
and that was that case over by River Hill on,
That's correct.
on Medina Highway.
And that's not to say that mixed use would have been any more or less appropriate than C3, but the initial request was going to be in mixed use. But because of the concept plan requirement, they shifted that request to
But the
C3.
two-step part might have opened that door, is that what you were thinking?
Maybe. I
Well,
haven't specifically asked, but it's possible.
I think it almost could have, because with a mixed use, there typically is a residential component to that, you know, could tie into a neighboring residential area. Maybe not a physical tie-in, but be more appropriate than what a C3 zoning could possibly happen. And so that's an instance where I think that a concept plan probably would have helped their case a little bit. We still would have had homeowners, up in arms about anything being built on their empty lot behind them, but I could see how a mixed-use development in that location wouldn't necessarily be out of the question.
Yeah, but in that case, we probably would have denied that request anyways, without the concept plan.
Without the concept plan, we would have, but with the concept plan,
But with the two steps,
with the two steps, it wouldn't have got to that.
It would never have got to the second step, I don't think. But
Yeah, like I said, the two-step has its own inherent concerns. But like I said, we have seen some issues with the concept plan being required right up front when it's not as detailed as a planned development district. So just wanted to bring that one up for discussion and kind of get a good feel and see what our best options are.
Okay. Well, Rustin, you'd rather just eliminate the concept plan altogether.
I mean, that seems the most consistent. I don't want to open a door and have problems, but I mean, we have to be cautious if somebody brings something and we don't know what it is, and we're probably not going to approve.
Right.
It's on them to bring something. I mean, if they have no plan whatsoever, then it's not a real strong case.
I guess, that would be the option is that don't have the requirement, but let the applicant know that I would say more often than not, it helps her case. I don't know. Any other thoughts before we give?
I'm on the fence.
Yeah.
And we can come back to it. I
Do
can
no
keep rolling.
harm.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, we all agree that, being on a developer's side of this, that, notifying the general public about a concept plan doesn't I don't think that's necessary. I think letting planning and zoning review a concept plan, I think most of the time helps. And it also lets us see something that if they're planning something really wrong or doesn't fit, that we can see that.
We've seen that too.
Mm-hmm.
We've had concept plans that we're like, no, that's,
Yeah.
but that's really not what we should be relying on those cases, because that wasn't a mixed use, that was for multifamily.
Multifamily.
I still like the idea of having a concept plan being required for planning and zoning to review.
The way it is right now, they have to have it up front. So
Correct.
if we made no change, that would continue.
That's correct.
I guess we could leave it like that, but would you tell us if it's becoming a stumbling block, then?
Yeah, we can keep, I don't know about keep count, but yeah, if we keep getting requests that get modified or delayed.
Right.
We can certainly report back and address it later.
I want to think on that one.
We'll come back for our final, before the final motion and
Okay,
pinpoint one. Building materials, so House Bill 2439 from the last legislative session largely limited cities' ability to restrict or require certain building materials outside of building code requirements. So for example, different cities have masonry requirements. Any building must have a certain percentage of masonry on all construction. Those types of blanket rules are no longer allowed. Our R3 and RT zoning district both have this section on building appearance, that the accessory use shall appear as a residence with wood, rock, or brick exteriors, roof constructed of materials similar pitch to other residences in the neighborhood, and the front door and windows shall face the front of the lot or the street. Certainly the first one, I think, would be against that House bill. The second two could be marginal, certainly not prescribing materials, but referencing other projects that are adjacent. So my recommendation would be just strike the entire thing rather than chop it up any further, since we can't hit that primary one of the materials. I don't know that there's a need to dictate the roof shape and the front door location.
Is there some language in RT though that says it's supposed to look like a house? Isn't there? That's
It
separate
is,
from this?
trying to think if there's anything other than this section.
I think that is kind of the intent, that it looks like a
Right.
house.
Yeah, that's certainly the intent, so that the scale doesn't start transforming the neighborhood.
Whether the doors and windows, I mean, to me, that's kind of irrelevant.
yeah, I agree. I think, referring specifically to any materials, I don't think, like you said, it goes against the House bill. Having a shape to avoid somebody building a lighthouse, and calling it a residence, you could strike the materials. You could say a roof constructed with a similar to pitch to other residences in an adjoining neighborhood.
Or just the whole
Or-
building in itself.
Yeah, I don't know if you refer to scale, or shape, but,
The sentence, the first sentence, the building containing the accessory use shall be designed to appear as a residence, may just be enough
Yeah,
in and of itself, and then you just strike the.
stop it right there.
Yeah, strike 1, 2, and 3.
That's pretty broad.
yeah.
Mike, are you comfortable with that one?
You can live in a lighthouse.
It's pretty, yeah, that's pretty broad. I mean, that's clearly the intent.
Mm-hmm.
And residences can range, they can have a huge range of what they look like, so.
Yeah,
Especially if Garrett's
if you
drunk.
have,
But you don't want it to look,
if you have two lighthouse-shaped houses and you're building in between them, go for it.
Yeah.
But I think,
What's, I'm thinking of generally accepted accounting principles. Could it be generally accepted residential neighborhood to fit in the neighborhood? I don't know.
and like the one on Clay Street, it was built as an office building, but it looked like a house.
right,
Now it's housing, but
right.
I think
Yeah,
that
went
was
from
the intent of
office
it.
back to apartments.
Right.
Driving down the street, I think most would probably not notice that it's a
Right.
4-unit apartment complex.
Right.
Or had been a 4-unit office complex for that matter. Yeah, I think we're good just keeping that first line. Building designed to appear as a residence, and just finish it there.
I like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Airport district. So airport's had a couple projects come through, smaller projects, but looking at the airport district, worked with the director and a couple of the board members. One of the things that we did not include was a definition and land use for aviation service and repair. So one of the request from the airport and the board was to add that in. I assumed airport service is part of an airport because you don't drive your airplane down the street to the corner mechanic, but they felt more comfortable having it specifically listed as they continue their services. So recommending we add this definition, and it is a lengthy one to capture as much as we possibly could. Add aviation service and repair, which includes aircraft maintenance, aircraft sales. I can read the whole definition to you if you'd like.
I think that's necessary.
Yeah, and then aircraft, I guess that may have aircraft sales in there twice, but aircraft facilities, including obviously landing fields, parking, etc. So I think they've seen this definition. They were comfortable that it captured all of their needs at the airport and the auxiliary uses and the fixed business operators and some of the other companies that are out there. And beyond that, we also went through the land use table and had a few additions from the original draft. As you can see, aviation service and repair is included as a permitted use. Added electronic sales and service as a permitted use, and that kind of relates to the folks that work on avionics and fix those pieces of the plane. Job and vocational training center, obviously kind of spearheaded with KISD's CTE program with aviation. Manufacturing assembly, still not manufacturing general, that's still a conditional use. We picked up hotel, we forgot motel, so that'll be a permitted use. And toy gift hobby and novelty shop as a permitted use. And those were all requested by the airport. I don't know if you guys had any further discussion on those or not. That's airport property and that area zoned around the airport included, so. And parking,
But that, if the airport's happy with that, then I'm fine with it.
Yeah, those all make sense.
parking requirements. So one of the things that we've discussed, and don't have the exact language in front of me from the old code, but trying to pick up a general parking ratio for multi-tenant buildings. So one of the things we found an issue with is tenant changes occur in multi-tenant buildings. From a permitting standpoint, we have to go back and check the parking after everything's built to make sure they still have enough parking for that new use to go in. So an example, if you had 3 tenants, 1 in office, 1 retail, and 1 restaurant, and we have enough parking to match those as if they were standalone. If the office closed and another restaurant went in, they wouldn't have enough parking because the restaurant requires more parking spaces. But obviously behind a multi-tenant building, you have a lot of shared parking and overlap and exchange of hours and so on. So looking to see if there's a need or if it makes it easier for the development side to have a general parking ratio. Average of 200 is the average between office and retail and restaurant parking. And that's your 3 big users of your multi-tenant buildings. I just wanted to have that discussion. The other one that we brought up to the city council during the workshop was trying to draft some kind of conditional use permit for an existing grandfathered building that does not meet current parking standards. After that discussion with council, they decided that was probably not the best direction at this time. Thinking of some of our areas that are redeveloping, we have some older buildings that maybe 5,000 square feet and they have 3 or 4 parking spaces. That certainly doesn't meet any kind of retail load, much less a restaurant or office. But rather than provide an avenue for those to remain, council recommended to not have that one. But
I think as far as the general parking goes, an average is as good a number to come up with as anything else. And you know,
restaurant is 1 to 100, office and retail is 1 to 300.
And so just going back to your example, if all 3 of those spaces end up being restaurant, you might still end up being short. And
right.
So that's part of the developer and the tenant's due diligence to look at, if I put my restaurant here, we're gonna run out of parking and may need to find another place for that. So, I think the average is a good, clean way to define that.
But we are raising it for office and retail,
That's correct.
doubling it, basically.
Yeah, doubling it. If it were intended to be all offices, they'd be required more parking. If it were intended to be all restaurants, they get a parking break. But I think, to Mr. Arman's point, I would anticipate the market helps balance quite a bit of that.
Well, if you're doing if you're building an office building, then
That's true. It would
might,
be built as an office building rather than a multi-tenant divided up strip center. That's true.
so they would not be under this.
I guess it depends on how it's divided up. If it's built out as multiple spaces that are still separate, we'd probably go for this route, because as an office closed, if it's a zoning that allows it and someone comes in with a retail request or a restaurant request, that would kind of trigger that.
But if you were to build a office building like One Shriner Center,
Right.
that's hard to work a restaurant into.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Would that even comply now? It's 200, one space per 200 square foot of gross floor. It might double that parking requirement.
Yeah, it would certainly increase that. But I think Shriner 1 is the example. I think there's a valid argument there.
But to me, the restaurant's the outlier.
Yeah, it is. And of course, we've got varying examples here in town. We've got some shopping centers that already are tight on parking and they have vacant spaces. We've got others that, even on Black Friday, we don't have a full parking lot, whether it's restaurant, retail, or office, or any combination thereof. Just trying to find an easier balance for some of those tenant spaces to be able to change over without having to revamp their parking or acquire more land or remain vacant because they're missing a few spaces.
Yeah.
So just trying to find that flexibility.
Well, we ran into this a little bit with Mr. Motherall, where his developed center ended up using a lot more spaces than what he had planned on, and then was trying to get a standalone parking lot in the neighborhood behind him.
Right.
I think with this kind of code requiring more parking up front gives him the flexibility to have more options for tenants.
We've got a couple other smaller, 4 or 5 unit shopping centers that are pressed for parking based on the code as the different tenant mix changes. But some of them have ample parking, or there's a neighbor that has ample parking, so you don't see the parking issue, I guess, between them.
I like going to the average.
Yeah, I do too, but I don't like the idea of doubling the requirement for all new offices and retail. That's what we'd be doing.
So the One Shriner Center example is still considered a multi-tenant building.
With no restaurant in there, but we just doubled the parking requirements.
Yeah, because I guess it's still set up as kind of a public lobby, and then
Right.
they each have their own spaces. I guess at the same time, I could see them making a valid argument that it's designed for offices and maintaining that office designation only, even though they are multi-tenant offices. Another example, we have a shopping center that the shell was permitted as retail, which is the lower parking ratio, and the first tenant they're looking for is a restaurant. So that's gonna already eat up 50% of their parking. The other 2 tenant spaces may not be able to get filled because they're actually out of parking. They've allocated more parking than they built. So that's where we kind of run into the issue is permitting. They get the permitting approval with less parking, and then when the tenant mix comes into play, we can't allow that second or third, or that last 1 or 2 tenant spaces to even be filled. Because by code, they now don't meet the parking on an existing building that they already built. So I know some of that's the developer and their intentions. How they handle that is up to them, but
It just seems like a big move. It's a big change.
and I don't have a specific number of projects that we've had to deny because the overall property didn't have spaces, but I can see a few properties where that could come into play, for sure. I know River Oaks being a large shopping center, every tenant change they have, we have to go back to a spreadsheet of their tenant spaces and parking count and reallocate parking spaces as we go through that process to make sure they still have enough parking.
Does 1 per 300 square feet just doesn't work for all of them?
I think some of that still probably scale. The larger properties, it probably still works. The smaller properties, you definitely see a parking issue when you get a restaurant or 2 in one property.
Wouldn't have enough parking.
Right. So some of it is based on that, is you get a Tractor Supply and Big Lots, that whole shopping center. Other than Ty-Vee football games, that parking lot's probably never full. It was originally built as Walmart, which would be retail at 1 to 300. I'm assuming the parking ratio back then was similar, but built as a retail center. Of course, you have 1 restaurant at least in there, a couple different retailers. But you take that same down to a 10,000 square foot building with 4 tenants and it gets tight pretty quick.
So if we left it alone, what would be the ramifications here? Just y'all would have to deal with that.
Yeah, it's just the
tenant change.
potential of having to deny a tenant finish out based on the rest of the tenant mix that's already been put in. So,
This would eliminate that problem.
well,
That's
it would start to balance some of that. I mean, some of
Right.
those existing centers may still have that problem, even with this change. But anything new coming in, we'd have at least that average to work with.
All for simplification. I just don't want to create another problem.
Right. And council voiced the same thing, overall, we are reducing parking on the restaurant side, increasing it on the retail side. That was case in point in the second one, that reduction in parking requirement, council was not supportive of. So we're not recommending that second piece on the slide there, but just trying to find a way to simplify it.
Well, you know, and I wish there was a way that we could isolate the restaurant portion of that. I mean, if somebody were to come in and want to do a series of medical doctor's offices, multi-tenant doctor's offices, and like Rustin said, we've automatically doubled the required parking necessary for that. But if one of those doctor's offices were to be a restaurant, that scenario is pretty unlikely.
Right.
But it could happen. You know, somebody could come in and put a Popeyes or Subway or something in a small.
Right. First floor of an
Space.
office building is certainly not unheard of.
And so, yeah, I think planning on more parking for those developments
That's
up
really-
front is a good idea.
It's in their best interest, in case if they can't market it what they initially thought it was gonna be and have to change up their tenant usage, I mean, they're covered.
Yeah.
I'm more of a fan of having too much parking than not enough. We see that too much in Kerrville. So if it's a new development, I'm good with this.
With leaving as it is, or do
No,
the average?
The average. If you think about, Popeyes is a perfect example. That mixed-use building didn't have a restaurant in it, and then comes Popeyes, and then where's everybody parking?
Well,
That means like if somebody wants to build a 5,000 square foot office building, they gotta have 25 parking
Yeah,
spots.
I did the math on that.
That's a lot.
It's a little, it's
Is there a number that, we could come up with that still adds more? I mean, is one per 250 square feet something that's worth considering? Gives you more spaces, but doesn't double it.
And if we need to do more homework on our end and come up with some better examples, the exact numbers to kind of highlight some properties and show what that shift would have been,
I
we
think
can
that
do
would be
that.
helpful.
We can push this off. Postpone this one and come back.
I want to open up two other cans of worms, but any fast food operation is going to have a drive-through from now on, period.
Yeah.
There's not going to be any inline fast food. Number two, if we continue to stay with this pandemic concept or whatever else, and the pattern is already made, there's going to be a whole lot more at-home officing. I don't want to talk about it now, but you go figure that out, okay? I mean,
You're
from
right.
up in the press box looking at it, I think that more people are going to be working from home going forward.
I see a lot of, maybe not Kerrville, but obviously more the metro areas for
Well,
sure.
exactly, but
Dedicated office spaces turning into something else.
as shopping centers.
Yeah.
Or restaurants. And so then we've got a building designed with a low parking count that's trying to meet the need of a high.
Yeah,
Parking
and that's
count.
where, when we get that tenant finished out and that permit for that tenant to move in, if they don't meet the parking as the entire property, they get denied the permit because they don't meet that code. Like I said, the new projects, this might soften that, make that less frequent, but still not a guarantee. Well, I take it back. At a new project, it would meet it because they're built to 1 to 200.
Mhm.
And then their parking mix becomes their own. But applying, of course, changing any rules and applying it to an existing building always gets a little bit tricky, so.
So you came up with the one space per 200 as an average of what we had in place. Yeah, if you could
Right.
do some research and maybe see what other communities have, that would help me.
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
So we'll put
One
that,
other possible point, how about a sliding scale? If you're below 200 feet, you got X parking places. If you're 400 feet, you don't necessarily double it, but it might be
Maybe it's-
50% over.
yeah, I'll see if I can
Maybe
find
it's
So a
some.
size of the
sliding scale
building.
thing might,
Maybe the size of the building, if it's under 5,000 square feet.
right,
Yeah,
right.
that's definitely would
Yeah.
be something
I've-
interesting to look at.
Tried to kind of work through that before, just trying to find what's that magic line. But I'll look and see if I can find some examples of that, because like I said, your bigger shopping centers, again, I'm just using Tractor Supply and Big Lots, that shopping center as an example. Obviously, it wasn't built that way originally, but they obviously have ample parking. Even if we put 2 more restaurants in there, they still have enough parking. I've also seen other towns, multi-tenant shopping center built entirely for restaurants. And they couldn't,
Fill it.
they actually went over parked almost double and they still run out of parking spaces. So, I mean, it just all depends. But, I think the sliding scale may be a good mark if we can find that boundary, where to draw those lines. So we'll come up with some better,
Just
other city examples and how it applies to some of our.
I mean, to me, it gives heartburn on the developer side because they're having to pay for that parking and they're not getting income off of it. But we see time and time again, HEB has had to increase their parking with their new building. Retailers want as much parking as they can to get as much people into their retail store. fighting the parking. We've all gone to places where we decided not to go anymore because the parking is too hard to get to. And so, I feel that, it's, on the end user side and on the general public side, it's a benefit. On the developer side, that I could see some heartburn, but I think at the end of the day, it's a benefit. But I think the sliding scale might be an idea to try and pursue.
See what we can come up with. The zoning code has several references to a document, City of Kerrville Development Standards. As we walked through the rewrite, that document was going to house parking standards, landscape, dark sky, tree ordinance, tree preservation, tree pruning, all the auxiliary codes that the Code Review Committee was tasked with looking at. As Code Review Committee looked at several of those, they decided to put several of them on a shelf and hold off for now. The one we don't have is the parking standards. So, as of right now, we actually do not have a specific parking standard in our zoning code for size, drive aisle, alignment, any of that kind of thing. As you guys know, a lot of the drive aisles dictated with fire lanes, so that's a safety factor there. But want to go ahead and put in the development standards document for now will basically just be parking standards and can be added to later as needed. But want to create some similar templates as these. And then, of course, the prescriptive sizes and angles and so on of parking standards. Obviously not uncommon to any development code. We just need to add that to ours. So maintaining the 9 by 19 parking space that we have, the same drive aisle width, but including the angle parking and how that shifts those requirements as well.
I think that's a good idea.
The other option would be remove the references to this document and just add a parking section. But I think as the Code Review Committee and as comprehensive plan action items come through, there could be some other auxiliary codes that may be addressed in the future, and this would be a good place to house them rather than create new chapters in the Code of Ordinances that can all be included in the development standards. So we'll maintain that document, and right now it'll just be a couple pages of parking guidelines.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And with that, I will stop there for our public hearing, because we'd have broken out into 3 different pieces. So if there is anyone that's called in on the telephone or through the Zoom app, Keisha, do we have any callers?
We have no callers, Drew.
Okay.
All right, public hearing closed
That'll work.
at 5:44. Okay.
Do you guys want to debate further, have an action on that, or move on through the presentation and come back to all 3?
Let's get this one out of the way.
Okay. So I have, we're going to hold off on parking requirements. I'll exclude that. This one will be amended to, for R3 and RT, that they remain, for the R3, buildings containing the accessory building shall appear as a residence. RT, the building shall remain to appear as a residence. And there's our big one.
Concept plan.
Change, no change, where do we want to go?
I think maybe we just need to leave it like it is.
Me too.
All right.
Anyone else agree on that?
I agree, but if it's bad, then.
Yeah, if we start seeing more, we can bring it back. Pretty good consensus on that one, guys?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
Making my notes here. Okay. Everything else was as presented, correct?
Yes.
Did I miss any?
Yes. All right. So, With that, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve as amended.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve as amended. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. All right, thank you, Drew. All right, item 2B, sign ordinance amendment.
The sign code update, as we were reviewing, going through a 6-month review on the zoning code, we thought, let's look at the sign code too. We did have a couple questions and concerns come up from some of our businesses in the RT zoning district. As you guys know, we're primarily talking about Earl Garrett, Barnett area, and then some on West Water Street, West Main, in that area of town. So the two things we're really looking at are the freestanding or monument signs, not building signs. The RT requires a sign, not on the building to be a monument sign attached to a monument matching the building materials. These are the two illustrations in the sign code for freestanding sign versus monument sign. Obviously, a freestanding sign is mounted on 1 or 2 poles, pylons, etc. Going through just a handful of pictures here. This is the RT district along Earl Garrett. I saved you guys a few pictures. I took some out. And these are West Water and West Main. So here's a quick summary of those and all those that I took out. Maximum height was 8 feet. Average came out to 7'8". As you can see, the majority are what we would call freestanding signs, not monument signs. There are 3 true monument signs where the sign was applied to a solid material matching the building. Most signs were not lit. One specifically had some uplighting, kind of landscape style uplighting on the sign. And of course, the church has the one electronic message board. So what we're recommending is to add a section to the sign code specific to RT, similarly to the Downtown Arts and Culture District. That the following following regulations apply to the establishments and freestanding or monument signs located in the residential transition district. Such regulations are in addition to other regulations found within this chapter, being the sign code, unless a conflict arises between those provided here and any other in the case regulations found within this section will apply. Signs may be freestanding signs or monument signs. Signs or freestanding or monument signs shall be limited to 8 feet in height from natural grade to the top of the structure. Freestanding or monument sign shall be limited to 32 square feet. Electronic displays shall comply with section 92-950 for hours of operation within the RT district. That section restricts the hours that an electronic message can display if they're within so many feet of a residential district. For the RT, since we know we have a mixture of uses, recommending that it just be required in that district. So that at, I can't remember if it's 10 or 11 o'clock, the sign shuts off. So the sign doesn't rotate after hours. Non-residential lots within the RT district shall be limited to 1 freestanding or 1 monument sign. Freestanding or monument sign shall be located or shall not be located within 25 feet of another freestanding or monument sign, so that any neighboring sign is not blocking the other. Signs shall not be internally illuminated, and any external illumination shall not produce glare on adjacent roadways or adjacent properties.
I think all of that sounds good. My only thought would be whether we need to have some type of setback called out to avoid traffic coming out of a RT parking lot onto a fairly residential street and end up blocking view. And, you know, there's probably not gonna be much. I was paid attention to the signs on West Main, and from curb to property line, typically there's around 10 feet, which is usually enough room for somebody to get out to the street and be able to see well enough to make a turn. And along West Main, there's not much room behind that property line to be able to put a sign much further back. You know, it's probably less than 5 feet. But I was just concerned that there may be instances where a curb and property line may only be 5 or 6 feet apart. And then if we have a sign right up on a property line, that could start to be a hindrance. So I think, you know, I was going to see what y'all's thoughts on having a setback for that.
Do we not
in
have a
place.
setback for just signs in general?
We do not. No part of the sign can overhang the property line, but the sign can be at 0.
Okay.
And remember, in an RT district, parking is required to be behind the building. And so whenever you're coming back out from that parking, more often than not, you're in a pretty narrow spot. And you have yards and landscaping and other things that are in a residential neighborhood. And so I think we don't want to set it up to where we're creating a dangerous situation. I think having a sign set back of 4 or 5 feet off the property line would probably help in most instances, and probably not hurt in most instances.
5 feet would work. 5 feet would be work. I mean, that's reasonable.
I would think.
And give you enough, you know, so a car could get to the edge of the curb and be able to see either direction.
Mm-hmm.
So going through the pictures, obviously that wasn't our focus early on taking the pictures. Off the top of my head, I would say most of these meet that.
Everything on Earl Gary
5
is, because
feet.
I walk up and down that road all the time, and
Yeah.
they're on the other side of the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And not the road. Now that one might,
On the side street, that one might be less than 5, but on the front,
in front of it
certainly
is.
it would be close. That one definitely is. Most of them on West Main and West Water, I think, are going to meet close to 5.
Mhm.
May not be exactly 5, but
Maybe 5 feet from the sidewalk mainly is what it's probably gonna end up.
Yeah, pretty close.
yeah, they may not. Is there grass
So if it's
between?
a 10-foot set,
Typically from
Property.
curb to the property line and the right of way, typically there's about 10 feet.
Those are curb back sidewalks on West Main and West Water, right?
No, on West Water there, it varies, but
Close to the property line.
it gets pretty close. There is a strip of, when there are sidewalks, there's a lot of time there's a strip of grass between the sidewalk and the curb.
Okay.
Sidewalk
should be on the property line in that case.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think, like I said, we'd have to check them all, but I don't think we're creating any non-conformities with that. Maybe 1 or 2. But
that sounds reasonable.
go back to our list here.
So on that, we'll just add 5-foot setback from the front property line.
I got one just thought to throw out on the table. Right now, you say it's a maximum, it's 8-foot max height. I mean, that's the same height for monument sign on Sidney Baker.
Part of the reason we're recommending a separate section rather than just call out a freestanding sign is allowed. Freestanding sign on Sidney Baker any of the streets that allow freestanding signs, the max height is 35. But the monument is still 8 feet.
Right. Guess
To
that's-
keep that scale, I mean, one, we're basing it off of what's out there. I don't believe any sign is over 8 feet. If so, it was, you know, a little detail to the
Looked like to
sign,
me,
but-
one of them was taller than the other ones. Most of them look way less than 8 feet.
Yeah. Well, the average was 7'8". So,
Average was 7'8".
and they're all right between 6 and 8 feet.
Okay.
So,
I don't know.
but, I mean, from the vehicle in the road and driving by, or even walking on the sidewalk, they're not, certainly not out of scale to what the development is.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll add 5-foot front setback. That means on the corner lots, I'm certainly not trying to pick on anybody, but on the corner lot, since I have an example here, that one would still be okay, 5 foot off of Earl Garrett up to the property line on that side street. That should still clear any kind of corner visibility issue at that scale.
Hey,
Do we want to add a 5-foot corner setback as well?
I think you kind of have to, because that.
I think
Yeah,
so.
That's
it should be the
problematic
same.
from, if you don't, it's gonna be problematic from one street or the other.
Because you could have your parking in an RT district exiting out onto a side street.
That's right.
So let's put it on,
5-foot front setback and 5-foot corner side setback.
yes.
on another, perhaps related, there's no restrictions on orientation of the sign, parallel to the street or perpendicular?
No restrictions. Yeah, you see the examples, we certainly have.
Yeah, there's a
combination.
mix, yeah.
Okay,
All right.
any other questions there? Okay, Keisha, do we have any callers for the public hearing on sign code?
No, sir, there are no callers.
Okay,
All right. Do we have a motion for amendments to the sign code?
I'll make a motion to approve as amended.
Our only amendment was the 5-foot setback.
Yes.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve as amended. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 7-0.
okay, and thoroughfare plan, again, while we're digging in and reviewing things, kind of take a look at the thoroughfare plan to see if we could come up with any changes or any issues that we had seen. I've got 2 sets of maps for both of these items. This one here is near Olympic and Loop 534, right next to the middle school.
The new middle school?
New middle school, yes, thank you. As drawn, this proposed collector kind of runs tangent to Olympic Drive and then connects to Loop 534 to cross this side. You can barely see the property line is right there for the middle school. So that proposed collector actually ran right through the middle school property. So recommending this change to come around that property. And then as this development back here occurs, that alignment will be designed and built at that time. It's kind of my public reminder, the proposed streets on the thoroughfare plan are not a designed alignment. It is just a connection point showing that from Olympic Drive to Loop 534 and across up to Cypress Creek Road, there is an intention of a collector street to make those connections. How those properties develop will dictate where those roads are eventually built, but obviously a known project like the middle school, we don't want to have that line go right through it. And this is another one out in the ETJ. Let me switch maps real quick. So this is our 1 mile ETJ. Once we go to 25,000 population, this will be the 2 mile ETJ, kind of give you a reference point. And this is a connection between Bearskin Trail and Ranchero Road. So, of course, here's city here as you come out Ranchero Road. The dead end of Ranchero Road, you can see it would be nice to have a connection to loop those two around, since there is no way to get between those two areas of the county. However, as you zoom in, I don't know how well it shows up on y'all's screen. This is the back end of Horizon neighborhood, which is a high fence neighborhood. And Four Bears and Bearskin Trail are developed with large estate lots. This neighborhood to the south is developed with large estate lots. And as you can imagine, developing out in the hill country, a lot of those streets dead-ended where they did for a reason, because they're either on the peak or at the valley. So that connection would actually have to cross 2 or 3 valleys up and down through existing developments. Had a couple citizens bring this to our attention that it was largely not feasible and made them uncomfortable how close it was to their property. So just wanted to see if we wanted to recommend removal, since the feasibility of that road is slim in that location, much less without the entire area redeveloping anyway.
So you're recommending removing it, not adding it?
Yeah, just removing it. Yeah. It is currently on the plan and has been for some time, but we are recommending just take it off.
Yeah, I think it was just on a map, it looked like that, and they wanted to connect the two lines.
Yeah, like I said, from the map standpoint, looks real easy.
Right.
Drew, on this map that you've got up now, what is that dotted line that crosses not the dotted line that connects,
Sorry,
but the other one that goes up?
This vertical line here,
Yes.
this would be the ETJ, our 2-mile ETJ, once we establish 25,000 population. So the current 1-mile ETJ is located here. So this is 1 mile from the current city limits. This would be 2 miles from the current city limits.
I think the fact that everything is pretty well developed out back there, there's not, on a map, it looks like it would be really advantageous, but in reality, the technical aspect of trying to connect those two probably doesn't really make that much sense.
If it were vacant land, I would argue otherwise, that someone, when they develop it, can figure out a way to make it work. But since these are between 3 or 4 existing neighborhoods.
Well, I think it makes sense to take it out.
Okay.
I sure could have used it a couple weeks ago, but I think it's fine to take it out.
Okay. And I'll do one more call. Keisha, is there anyone online for the public hearing?
No, Drew, there are no callers.
Thank you.
Okay, so do we have any questions regarding the thoroughfare plan changes? Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion, we accept it as presented.
I have a motion. A second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve thoroughfare plan as presented. All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carries 7-0. Item 3A, discuss conditional use permits for short-term rentals.
Mr. Chairman, if I'm gonna make my 55th anniversary, I've got to leave. May be excused, please. But on the short-term rentals, the one thing I brought up was that was brought up last week about the sexual predators in neighborhoods and the possibility of them renting a B&B, next door to the people that complain. I talked to some law enforcement people that work in that area, and the one thing they kind of said, well, if you are on that list and registered as a sexual predator, you cannot leave your residence where you live for more than 48 hours without, informing your probation officer or whatever else. So that was their only port, but saying that had any sort of ability to check on residents of a being, you know, that does not exist in law enforcement now, right now. So I don't know, it's probably beyond the scope of what we're trying to do and what you're doing as staff on this sort of thing, but that was the one thing I did find out anyway.
Well, that covers the ones that have already been caught once, at least once.
Good point, good point. Thank you.
All right. Well,
See you next time.
all right. Enjoy your
Thank you, sir.
evening.
I will indeed,
Best to the missus.
indeed.
For the better half.
Better, I know my fractions, my better 7/8.
Uh-huh.
What is this 1/2? Excuse me. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman, Commission did ask for a discussion item so we can kind of openly discuss through conditional use permits for short-term rentals. What conditions we've worked with, what conditions we need to consider adding as just a staff recommendation. Of course, we can go any further than that and kind of look at what are some of the key parameters the commission wants to know about or hear from. Then we can express that to our applicants as well. I don't know specifically where you wanted to go, so we actually posted this as a discussion on short-term rental CUPs.
You know, I feel like the way we've handled these here lately, it's, you know, it hadn't been easy, but I think it's been effective as long as it's understood that a conditional use doesn't mean automatic approval with conditions. It just means that if it's approved, there may be some conditions, or there could be some conditions. Right. I think, especially referring to short-term rentals, it really comes down to is exactly where they're at, and the impact that they could have on that neighborhood, the benefit versus the detriment to that neighborhood. And so, so far the cases that we've had before us, we've approved some, we've denied some, and I think those were the right decisions to make. And I think that that's seemed to be working, but I'm not sure there's really any other need to start trying to rewrite the zoning code or change zoning districts to accommodate that.
I don't know how you would.
Yeah.
One thought I had was just to put out on the table for today is are they appropriate in our R1 districts? Appropriate in that one district, and think about that a little bit.
You know, I see some R1 districts along the river that are close to the river trail, maybe in a historic neighborhood, that I could see that might be appropriate, but I think it also comes down to public input. You know, we had one where we had neighbors that were in support. We had one where nobody was in support. I think that needs to come into play too, but I think that there probably are some instances where in an R1 district it would be conducive to a short-term rental if there were amenities close by, you know, whether it's shopping or the river, that would justify that.
I guess you're right. I agree with that, but my concern is the mix. You mentioned the neighbors not wanting it or wanting it. That's going to change over time, but that never leaves that property once it's granted. So
Yeah.
it's a permanent deal.
And to Mr. Harmon's point, when we sit down with customers looking to apply for a conditional use permit, as you kind of went through, that's the first thing we explained to them, what this process is and why it's in place. Through the adoption of the zoning code, we established this use in most of the residential districts is not appropriate by right. Otherwise, it would just be allowed. So conditional use permit is just that. Do we want to look at case by case? Is this allowed or is this appropriate at this location? Yes or no? If not, are there conditions that we can apply to this case to make it appropriate in this location? Which is typically where we land on a lot of the CUPs. And then the third case, there are not enough conditions we can come up with that make this location appropriate, and it should be denied. And so that is part of our kind of process that we explain to the customers, so they know what to expect here, that is, we give recommendations as staff on those kind of typical conditions that will get most of them across the goal line. But as we've seen with different uses, not just short-term rental, sometimes those conditions and more are still not enough, and it does not fit that particular location, whether it's just neighborhood, the lack of amenities nearby.
I think as long as staff sets does not give any false expectations to an applicant, I think keeping it as a case-by-case basis we have it now is fine.
Well, take for instance, we had 2 last meeting, and staff recommended to approve both of them. Moving forward, knowing what we've looked at now, would you now tell that applicant that's not happen, or how would you do that different?
Yeah, so our recommendation is still based on policy. So we have it set up in the code for a conditional use permit. We kind of have at least established a standard set of conditions for those. So I think,
Your approval is just saying, we check the boxes, it meets all the requirements.
Right.
It's not
So from
necessarily say, y'all should approve this, it just
Right.
says,
Is there a way to change the verbiage instead of saying recommend approval?
meets requirements.
Does it say meets requirements?
Yeah.
Meets requirements for approval? As opposed to saying recommend, somebody could get the impression that this is
right.
on its way to approval.
If staff says yes, the commission will say yes, right?
Where-
I don't see any issue with that. Do you?
Yeah, we know what that means, but I've heard
Right.
from the public,
Yeah.
actually, that's got a few people riled up.
It has. It has
So-
before. Yeah, and then one of the other things that moving forward, we will point out, again, based on our conversation this last time, depending upon the location they're looking at, we may ask them to point out the amenities that they think they're targeting, that they're marketing for. Obviously, we had one on the river or nearby the river trail. Obviously, they're going to market the river trail as part of their reason for having it. We may just mention that to the applicant. If this is the location you're wanting, the commission's gonna wanna know why you think this is a good location and what's your target audience and what's the amenity that you're trying to reach with your clientele. So we can at least ask them to go ahead and include that so that as those do come forward, we can have some idea what they're shooting for. I don't have any good examples on that, but other than the one that we approved, or actually the 3 that we approved that are within 1/8 of a mile from the river trail. Probably closer than that.
Yeah, I could see, a handful of instances where it might be appropriate. There's probably a lot more where it's not. But I think, like, if you can give them a heads up on what we're looking for, that would probably save some time and some energy. But I do like the idea of changing the verbiage from recommend approval to something else that's not as, promising, just to keep those expectations in check.
It's a good idea.
Okay.
Are you seeing,
I have something, if we're through with that topic. Did a little research,
are you switching topics on us? or-
well, within the rental units.
Okay, go ahead.
Did a little research on the internet, and short-term rentals seem to be a widely expanding thing all over the country. And to me, it seems like they need some control. We just don't want one every block. And I was thinking about on the sober living houses, the way they're controlled now, there's got to be there's a fixed distance between two sober living houses. You can't be closer than, I don't know the number, half a mile, say.
Mhm.
And if that would be applicable to short-term rentals, especially in light of the river trail, you could have bang, bang, bang right along the river trail, you know, if you didn't have some limiting factor. And I don't know if that's a good one or not, but
Well, it seems to me that if you have an amenity like the river trail, then this is probably a better use. You're gonna get more of them there,
right.
but in other neighborhoods, you're next door to them, whether they're spread out or not, might not be a good thing. So to me,
I'll look to see if I can find some other examples. I have the few different ordinances I have reviewed, I haven't seen that as a limitation, but that would make sense to have it not kind of overwhelm one neighborhood by having
Right.
10 within 2 blocks.
And it worked for the sober living houses. I don't remember what the number is
Mhm.
on distance of separation.
okay, so the ones that we've approved, those people came into the office and went through the process, right? They weren't found out and then citation, because I'm sure that
All
there's
but one.
Okay,
One was operating prior to coming in.
okay.
But
But still had a good case. And
right. Yeah. And I don't know the exact number. With the adoption of the zoning code in October, or effective date, October 2019, I think we had roughly 30 or 40 operating prior to that, when the code was silent to them. I haven't checked finances list to see how many of those are still operating, but, so, I mean, we have 30 to 40 in town already.
grandfathered in.
Yeah, grandfathered in with the three that we've approved through this process. Obviously, our neighbor Fredericksburg has a significant amount more than that. Their process is just a permit. So they go through, fill out the license, have a home inspection with building inspection, and I think fire marshal. If they meet certain requirements and check all the right boxes of requirements, they're allowed by right. Obviously, as we went through the code rewrite, it was clear with the community input that was not what Kerrville wanted.
Right.
That the case-by-case public process is what was sought after with the citizens. So I think to your first question, Mr. Zuru, is R1 appropriate? I would have a hard time separating R1 from R1A because it's still single family. Even most of the R2 districts are largely single family. So we start stacking all those together. I think the question is, are they appropriate in Kerrville or not in the residential district at all? Because even though we have 3 or 4 different zoning classifications, the neighborhoods are all fairly similar, all single family. Obviously density changes, but the land use doesn't change that much. So I would have a hard time pulling one out and leaving the others in, just because they are so similar from the land use standpoint.
And, and eventually with enough denials, the word will get out that that's,
We'll see our limit. And
Okay, so in Fredericksburg, you mentioned those people get a permit. Is that forever on that property?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that may not be apples to apples.
And I say permit, it may be an annual license, so they may have to renew it.
Yeah,
every
I
year.
mean, to
I'm
me,
not
there,
familiar enough.
what, I guess where I'm going with that thought is we approve this, and then it goes downhill. I mean, there's nothing anybody can do about it. And so, but maybe in Fredericksburg, if it's an annual permitting process, somebody's, they're not following the rules, or you can revoke their permit.
And that may be something that we need to consider as a license on top of the conditional use permit.
I
Make
think
sure
that
they
might
be-
be a good idea.
And I know we talked about that also with the rewrite. I think there was hesitation there just on the continual renewals. But it's probably,
Well, it's a
probably
way-
any licensing.
Yeah, it's a way to make sure that things are being handled properly. Okay.
And since we just had a little talk on signs, should the short-term rentals be restricted from signage?
They
That
are.
just kind of breaks up the neighborhood.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Single-family district, I think off the top of my head, does not allow any signage
Okay,
except for the home occupation, which I guess you could argue it is a home occupation. That doesn't fall on the list of home
No.
occupation.
No.
It's not in that same list. So yeah, I don't believe, I'll double check. I don't believe they could put up a sign.
Good.
And obviously, something on the, front door identifying the name of it might be somewhat appropriate, but signage out in the street,
right.
a little welcome sign, welcome to Drew's Airbnb versus neon sign out front's a little different.
But some of those in the RT district would be allowed signage under the RT
That's right.
zoning.
And in the RT district, they are allowed by right.
Mhm.
So they would not come through for a conditional use permit.
And
All
the
right.
other thing, it seems like maybe Rusty commented something about the size of the streets that a short-term rental could be on. Should be a collector or something. Did you not say that? You okay?
We talked about it.
We talked about like these little side residential streets. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
Whereas if it's on a main thoroughfare or, a main collector street that, people are coming and going to get to things, that made more sense.
The difficulty we would have there is the current code for new development. A residential property cannot front a collector or a thoroughfare.
Oh, yeah.
So if they are more transportation roads rather than driveways and on-street
Yeah.
parking,
Nobody wants
see.
to back out on
So,
those streets.
that would conflict too much for newer areas.
Well, I think it was more of a like, okay,
You're right.
this makes sense on this type of street versus 4 blocks off the main drag.
Right off Guadalupe Street is one
Yeah,
example,
right.
is a collector, but we have numerous curb cuts and properties that front it currently.
That really just kind of comes down to one of those criteria items that we're looking at as
Which
part
makes
of the
sense.
conditions on whether it's appropriate or not. All right. Well, was there, I think that was it, other than,
That's it.
that's it.
I'll check to see how common a distance requirement is for the short-term rentals. And like I said, through our staff discussions with applicants, we'll throw in the amenities and kind of reword some of our staff reports.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Sounds good.
Okay. Commissioners, any other thoughts, questions, comments? Meeting adjourned at 6:24.
Thank you guys very much.